in the medieval text as the philosopher. They didn't necessarily use his name. So this concept of not experimenting, not using empirical data, Aristotle thought that women had fewer teeth than men, just because they were not men's equals. He never bothered looking in somebody's mouth, and so this.
Why would you?
What?
No, if logic is perfect, why would you bother to check? Well,
but logic is only perfect if you've got a systematic world in which I'm sorry, I'm thumping the table. You have a systematic world in which you have an argument that is A or B, and there's no middle.
But if logic is perfect and your conclusion is perfect, there's no reason to check. How could you possibly be wrong?
Because if you put bad premises inside of your argument, you can argue soundly, and Steve's going to back me up on this, you can argue soundly with perfect logic, and yet your conclusion will be unverifiable.
Well, why didn't you go to Kyle on that one?
Pardon?
Why didn't you go to Kyle on that one?
Kyle.
Go to Kyle on that. Yeah. Why did you go to Kyle? Why did you automatically go to Steve?
Because I go to Kyle for fashion news.
I see where this is. I see what this means.
Okay. No, Kyle, you are one of the better artists I know. So I'm not. I couldn't draw
just
my
not
way
that
out
good
of
in the logic and reason category. Got it.
Don't know how to dress.
Oh, stop. Anyway.
So in many ways, that's where we wanted to start, was with looking at some of the history of these heresies and how different methods of thought, and of course, in the Christian era, you get the development of, well, what would you say was the earliest Christian heresy?
You have a better idea on that than me.
I know, but I was setting you up. It's called a dramatic pause.
I realize that, but I was going to let you go because you have an outlandish idea, and I wasn't going to touch it with a 10-foot pole.
My opinion is that the earliest Christian heresy was Christianity. Christianity itself is heretical. In some ways, it was a heretical form of Judaism. It was a group of beliefs that were out of fashion. One of the reasons that they were persecuted by the Roman Empire, these are all out of order, was because they challenged well, you can talk about this. How did the early Christians challenge the power structure of the Roman Empire?
Well, basically the very nature of their religious ceremonies. Remember, Jesus didn't leave an instruction manual. That's something that Muhammad figured out 600 years later. But the very ecclesia, or community, as we would call it, had to figure out how to form itself. And so the very earliest forms of worship were known as the agape love feasts. Agape is one of the 7 or 8 Greek words for love. Greeks had quite a few different words for love, depending on the kind of love and who loved each other. Agape was considered a selfless love. And these very early Christian gatherings, these very, very early Christian groupings, were held in secret in rich women's homes, essentially. They would invite in other Christians, usually by secret signs or having known each other. They would invite people over for a feast, not just women. They would invite women, men, people of different social ranks, which was considered very racy by the Romans, and slaves, all sitting around a single table as equals, enjoying a feast.
What can you tell us about this image, by the way?
This is one very ancient fresco of an agape love feast. In fact, you can see the Greek agape over on the I guess it's our right. Yeah. And you can
Latin letters, by the way.
Yeah, and you can see these people gathered around a table eating, and of course they're eating a meal in reverence and in remembrance of the Last Supper, where Jesus offered the bread and wine. But if you were a detractor of these people, and many, many Romans were, because of the fact that they were violating all sorts of social boundaries, women, men, and slaves all eating together as equals, that was quite disturbing for them. And so they started making rumors about these agape love feasts. In fact, they would start using the wrong words for love. They would stop using agape and use a word like eros, which means sexual love. And then they talk about the feasting. And of course, the nature of communion, the nature of Eucharist, is that you are eating bread and drinking wine in remembrance of Jesus and his body and his blood. So you can easily imagine, if you've got detractors out there who want to make Christians look bad, they're going to talk about these feasts, these erotic feasts where they're practicing cannibalism. And so you can see where this upset of society.
Okay, I want to jump in here.
Sure.
Because to me there is another way that this upsets the social order, and this, we're going to come back to this repeatedly. And again, the earliest church was, of course, not persecuted until a certain period of time.
Right. Certain periods of time.
Well, it came in, it got worse, got lesser, and so on.
Correct.
There is a particular Bible verse which came up, and I'm going to share it with you right now, which is, the congregation of believers was one in heart and soul. No one claimed that any of his possessions was his own, but they all shared everything that they owned. That's from the book of Acts. And that verse has probably caused more deaths. No, it's not. You'd have to make it sharp, because that basically is advocating communism.
Right. So right off the bat, you've got a society, a very small group of people, but they are upsetting the social order. I don't think there was any thought in the heads of any of the emperors or anything that these Christians are going to come take over. They were upsetting the social order. They were a movement from the bottom up that was asking for some very revolutionary movements inside the Roman society, and that gave them a bad what is the term I'm looking for? Reputation. Yeah, that's
and
it.
Of course, everybody needs somebody to blame,
right,
for your social problems. Anyway.
Yes.
So my contention is that Christianity was originally a heresy. And one thing that we've found in our research is that typically, what do you call a heresy that is successful?
Orthodoxy.
Yeah. When a movement becomes mainstream, it becomes orthodox, and then it moves on to try to suppress the other heresies. It's like everybody wants the monopoly. It's
the old Overton window that the society is being pulled one way or the other. The idea of what is taboo versus what is acceptable to everybody versus that funny little area in the middle of discussion, things you can fight over. And so these are very flexible. These are going to move over time.
How are we doing, guys? We've been talking for 20 minutes. You haven't said much.
You guys are fantastic, but
I'm not sure you both should do it.
We're listening, learning. You both should do a channel like now. The chemistry that you two have on camera is just fantastic.
Well,
it's not as good as the chemistry Steve and I have, of course.
Of course not.
Oh,
not. And you guys have the advantage.
I'm kidding. It's totally. It's so much better. It's so much better.
All right.
I'm totally
anyway,
joking.
So let's go on to real heresies.
Real heresies.
Real heresies.
Okay. Well, Dr. Griffith, what is heresy?
Well,
Webster's define.
Oh, he's breaking out a dictionary argument from dictionary.
You know what I mean, the Q levels have to come down.
When my students pull out a dictionary definition, that paper's dead. Sorry, gang. There's no coming back from that problem. But if you go back to word origin, heresy comes from the Greek word to choose. And I think this gets at the heart of the matter, in that the people who take on heresies, who hold heresies, who have been instructed not to have these heresies, are choosing to be heretical. But I'm getting way ahead of myself, aren't I?
I'm just waiting.
Okay. When we're talking about the formation of the church.
Wait a second. Kyle, are you pro-choice?
Sure.
Heretic! Burn him! Anyway. So
there are many nights where I would. There are many nights where I would take the burning. Absolutely.
There's many nights when you probably do, from what I've seen on this show.
That's true.
Okay,
that is true too.
True.
So what early Christianity had to do, aside from getting over those humps, is actually figure out what Christianity was supposed to be. Paul of Tarsus is going to be instrumental in including the Gentiles in the mix. And so it was no longer a heretical Jewish sect. It was now its own group, but it was still unformed. They didn't actually agree on the canon, what was to be in the Bible, and this is an early version of it, until 397.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I thought there were much.
Well, there were gatherings of books, but I mean, they're still picking and choosing and throwing stuff out. Anyway.
That's after Jerome.
Yes, that's after Jerome.
Okay.
Yeah, Jerome went to a lot of trouble translating a whole bunch of books that he didn't need to, because they were going to get thrown out by later Christians. So,
by the
sorry,
way, guys,
Jerome.
if we get too into the weeds here, you're welcome to stop us and say, who the hell was Jerome? And I don't know if you know that or not.
Who is Jerome?
Saint Jerome. Jerome of Antioch was one of the church fathers who basically created what the Catholic Church calls the Vulgate. He created the Latin translation of the Greek text of the Bible, which became the basis of Catholic theology from about...
He took on the Hebrew too.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
That was the second part of what he did. He
Right.
incorporated the text from the Hebrew and created what was the Latin Vulgate, which became the basis of the Latin theology from about 325 until
No. The Vulgates were happening between 382 and 405.
And it lasted until about 2018, I believe.
Yeah, it's still going. Yeah. Jerome was.
It's like we're
like one of.
You know how great this is. It's like Steve and I are watching a PBS show right now. This is how good, like an NPR almost podcast. That's how good this is.
This is like a recorded thing that I am watching. This is live, right? They really do this in real time?
I'm not sure anymore. That's how good it is.
It's real time.
Okay, but once they've got the book settled on, they have to settle on doctrine, on orthodox ideas.
Orthodox?
Orthodox.
Right. What does orthodox mean?
Orthodox comes from the Greek ortho meaning straight and dox meaning opinion. So to say something is orthodox it means it is the straight opinion. And so wavering off of these opinions is heretical.
Oh, I'm sorry. No.
Anyway, so wavering off of these angles is not cool to the rest of the church. You want to keep on this straight opinion. And note, they're not saying straight truth. Straight opinion. In other words, this has to be created. It has to be opinion that is revealed to somebody, i.e. the church hierarchy.
Okay. One of the things that I have found in my own research is that the issues that the church was willing to go to the bat with the hardest are the things that are really not that clear in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
Things like the concept of infant baptism. Now, the Bible says people have to be baptized. It doesn't really say details. There were people at various times, including especially the Anabaptists in the 15th century, who basically said that doesn't count. And the Catholic Church said, well, it's the basis of our power structure. Of course it counts.
Yeah.
And the Anabaptists were among the most harshly Again, that's late Middle Ages. We were trying to go semi-chronologically here, but we still haven't defined no, you still haven't listened to my definition of heresy.
I'm listening.
Which is basically, this is the church's definition, which came from a document issued in the